"That's my daughter. What did you do to her?" The woman shouted across the mall floor. Security was already moving, hands on radios, eyes locked on the maintenance worker kneeling beside the small girl. The child clutched his sleeve and cried while shoppers slowed to stare. Someone whispered that it looked suspicious, that security should separate them immediately. But the quiet single dad didn't argue or raise his voice. He simply stayed where he was, one steady hand resting on the frightened girl's shoulder. Minutes later, the entire mall would realize they had judged the wrong man. Because sometimes the people everyone overlooks are the only ones ready when things fall apart. Before I show you the exact moment when the maintenance worker saved that child in front of the guards accusing him. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. What nobody around them understood was that the quiet worker kneeling on cold tile had spent years running toward emergencies others ran from. They saw a uniform and a toolbox. They didn't see the training buried behind a life that had been rebuilt after loss. The little girl kept crying, small fingers twisted in the fabric of his sleeve. "Hey kid, it's okay," he murmured softly, lowering himself closer so she didn't have to look up at the crowd. Escalator motors hummed above them, and the smell of cinnamon pretzels drifted through the bright atrium. None of it seemed to reach the trembling child. He had already scanned the surroundings the way old instincts demanded. No parent in sight, no frantic voice calling her name, just shoppers watching and security boots approaching fast. "Sir, step away from the child." The security supervisor's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. He looked up calmly, but didn't move his hand from the girl's shoulder. "She's lost," he said quietly. "Found her near the fountain." The supervisor frowned, clearly unconvinced. Two more guards formed a loose circle as curious shoppers slowed their steps. The child tightened her grip again. "Don't let them take me," she whispered, voice shaking. The words hit him harder than the suspicion in the guard's eyes. He leaned closer. "Hey, nobody's taking you anywhere, all right?" Calm, steady, the same tone he once used in far louder places. Footsteps clicked sharply across marble as the girl's mother pushed through the crowd. "Leela." The woman rushed forward, expensive heels echoing, panic blazing across her face. Security straightened instantly. One guard gestured toward the kneeling maintenance worker. "That's my daughter. What happened?" Her eyes moved from the child to the man beside her and hardened. Suspicion arrived before gratitude. She was alone, he said, just trying to keep her calm. The mother pulled the girl toward her, protective arms wrapping tight. But the child suddenly swayed. Her small body went strangely limp. Ethan felt the change instantly. Years of training stirred before thought. The girl's breathing sounded wrong. Too shallow. Too fast. "Ma'am, something's not right." The mother froze, confusion cutting through her anger. "What do you mean?" she demanded. He was already reaching for the child's wrist, pulse racing, too irregular. Around them radios crackled and the crowd pressed closer. The supervisor spoke into his mic. "Get medical down here." But the maintenance worker's attention never left the child. He lowered her gently to the floor before anyone could object. The mother stared in stunned silence. Authority meant nothing against the quiet certainty in his movements. Shoppers held their breath. Somewhere an alarm chimed from a distant storefront. The mall suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too small. He tilted the girl's head carefully, listening. "Stay with us, kid, just breathe." The mother knelt beside them, fear replacing suspicion. Is she going to be okay?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he focused on the rhythm of the child's breathing. Old memories flickered at the edges of his mind. Desert heat, helicopter blades, voices shouting for a medic. He pushed the memories away. She needs space. Security hesitated. Then the supervisor motioned the crowd back. Air moved again around the child. The maintenance worker exhaled slowly. Somewhere deep inside, he already knew this night wasn't over. The girl's breathing hitched again beneath his steady hand. He glanced up at the mother. Does she have any medical conditions? The woman blinked, stunned. Asthma, sometimes. That was enough to confirm his fear. He reached for the small tool pouch hanging from his belt. The supervisor watched carefully now. Suspicion slowly giving way to uncertainty because the man they had been questioning moved with absolute confidence. And somewhere between the humming escalators and the stunned silence of the crowd, the truth about the quiet maintenance worker was about to surface in the next few seconds, everyone watching. The little girl's chest rose and fell too quickly. "Leela, sweetheart, look at me," her mother said, voice trembling as she held the child's hand. But the girl barely reacted. The maintenance worker leaned closer, listening carefully to each breath. It had a faint wheeze buried under the panic, the kind most people would miss in a noisy mall. He didn't miss it. "Does she have an inhaler?" he asked without looking up. The woman blinked, startled by the question. Yes, in my bag." Her hands fumbled through an expensive leather purse before she pulled out the small inhaler with shaking fingers. He took it gently. "All right, Leela, we're going to help you breathe, okay?" Security Supervisor Darius Holt watched closely now, arms crossed. Only minutes earlier he had been ready to escort the man away from the child. Now he wasn't sure what he was seeing. The worker positioned the inhaler carefully and guided the girl through the motion. "Slow breath, that's it," the girl tried. Her chest shuddered. A thin gasp slipped out. Her mother's panic surged again. "Why isn't it working?" He stayed calm. Sometimes panic makes it worse. He glanced up briefly. "Ambulance coming?" One of the guards spoke into his radio. Paramedics are on the way. Around them, the crowd had thickened. Phones hovered in the air. Whispers moved like wind. The worker ignored all of it. His attention stayed fixed on the child. He gently lifted her chin again, adjusting her position so her airway stayed clear. The woman watched every movement now with a new kind of fear. "What are you doing?" Helping her breathe. His voice stayed steady. The supervisor stepped closer, kneeling beside them now. "You trained for this, or something?" The worker gave a short nod without looking away from the girl. Something like that. Another shallow breath rattled from the child. He checked her pulse again, still racing, too fast, but still strong. That mattered. He looked at the mother again. When was her last asthma attack? A few months ago, but never like this. Her voice cracked. The man nodded slowly. "Okay, stay calm." "She needs you calm." The words sounded simple, but they carried quiet authority. Even the security supervisor noticed. The expensive marble floor felt colder by the second as the mother knelt beside them. She held her daughter's hand tighter. "I'm here, baby." The child's eyes fluttered weakly. The worker spoke again, low and steady. "Good, keep talking to her." Footsteps thundered somewhere near the entrance as the mall's medical response team hurried closer. The radio on Holt's shoulder crackled. "Paramedics 2 minutes out." 2 minutes. The man measured the time automatically. 2 minutes could feel like forever when someone couldn't breathe. He shifted slightly, keeping the child upright. Airflow mattered. Small adjustments mattered. Everything mattered. "Leela, take another slow breath for me." The girl tried again. A thin inhale finally filled her lungs a little deeper. Not perfect, but better. The maintenance worker nodded to himself. Good sign. Security Supervisor Holt watched carefully now, confusion slowly replacing suspicion. This wasn't panic, this was control. And that realization unsettled him. A moment earlier he had been questioning the man like a suspect. Now the situation looked very different. The mother noticed it too. She studied the worker's calm hands, the way he monitored the child without hesitation. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. Just a second. Then he gave a simple answer. "Just someone who found your daughter." The girl coughed suddenly. Sharp. Painful. The sound echoed across the atrium. The mother gasped. The worker reacted instantly, guiding the child forward so the cough cleared her airway instead of choking her. "Good, let it out." Another cough followed, then another, each one louder, each one pushing air deeper into her lungs. The crowd collectively exhaled. The girl finally managed a shaky breath. Not perfect, but stronger. The maintenance worker relaxed his shoulders slightly. Paramedics burst through the mall entrance seconds later with a stretcher. Moved back, they quickly knelt beside the child. One medic examined her breathing while the other checked vital signs. Then both looked at the worker. "You stabilized her?" He shrugged lightly. "Just kept her breathing." The medic gave a small, impressed nod. "Good work." The words hung in the air. Security Supervisor Holt noticed the change instantly. The paramedic spoke to the maintenance worker like a colleague. Not a suspect, not a stranger, a professional. The mother noticed it too. Her eyes widened slightly. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked the medic. The medic checked the monitor again. "She's improving." Relief rushed through the crowd like a quiet wave. The child blinked weakly now, breathing steadier. The worker slowly leaned back, giving the medic space. His job here was done. Or at least that's what he thought. But the security supervisor's voice stopped him before he could stand. "Hold on a second." Holt studied him carefully now. The suspicion hadn't vanished, but something else had replaced it. Curiosity. "Where'd you learn to handle a situation like that?" The man wiped his hands quietly on a cloth from his belt pouch. For a moment, he looked like exactly what everyone had assumed. Just a maintenance worker finishing a messy task. Then he answered calmly. "Old job." The supervisor narrowed his eyes. "What kind of job teaches you that?" The worker stood slowly now. The bright mall lights reflected off the polished floors as the crowd continued watching. He met Holt's gaze for only a second. "Combat medicine." The words landed softly. But the silence they created was thunder. "Combat medicine." The words settled into the air like a sudden drop in temperature. Security Supervisor Darius Holt stared at him, unsure if he had heard correctly. The paramedic kneeling beside the child glanced up as well, interest flickering across his face. "You serious?" Holt asked. The maintenance worker didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the paramedics attach a monitor to the girl's finger, tracking her oxygen levels. The steady beep of the device cut through the murmuring crowd. Her breathing had slowed, not normal yet, but no longer desperate. That mattered. "Used to be," he finally replied. The paramedic checking her airway looked up again. "Army?" He nodded once. "Yeah." That was all he offered. The mother, Marina Velez, remained kneeling beside her daughter, her hands trembling as she brushed the girl's hair from her forehead. The expensive calm she carried earlier had completely vanished. Now she looked like any terrified parent. "You said combat medicine?" she asked quietly. He shrugged again. "Long time ago," but the paramedic studying the monitor wasn't convinced. "You didn't just learn a little somewhere," he said. "You cleared her airway, stabilized her breathing, and kept her conscious through an asthma crash." He paused. "That's trained work." The worker glanced at him briefly. Kid needed help. That was the only explanation he seemed willing to give. The medic gave a faint smile. Still, good instincts. Another paramedic arrived, pushing the stretcher through the thinning crowd. Vitals? Improving, the first medic replied. They carefully helped the girl onto the stretcher. Her small fingers instinctively reached for the worker again. Don't go. The words came out hoarse but clear. He stepped closer so she could still see him. I'm right here, kid. Her mother watched that exchange with quiet confusion. Moments earlier, she had been ready to accuse him of something terrible. Now her daughter was holding his sleeve like it was the only safe thing left in the room. The medic secured the straps. Ma'am, we're taking her to St. Gabriel's to monitor her breathing, one of them told Marina. She nodded quickly. Yes, of course. Then she looked back at the man beside her daughter. I'm sorry about earlier, she said, voice tight with emotion. You were just protecting your kid, he replied simply. But Security Supervisor Halt still hadn't moved. He studied the maintenance worker the way people look at puzzles. Something about the situation refused to fit the assumptions he had started with. You work maintenance here? Halt asked. Night shift. The supervisor's brow furrowed, and before that, the worker picked up his small tool pouch from the floor. Different life. The paramedic chuckled lightly. That's one way to put it. The stretcher wheels locked into place, and the medics began rolling the child toward the mall entrance. The girl's eyes searched the crowd again. She spotted him instantly. Are you coming? He hesitated. Just a second. Before he could answer, the mother stepped forward. If he could ride along, that would help keep her calm. Holt blinked. The woman who had arrived furious minutes earlier was now asking the maintenance worker to stay beside her daughter. The medics shrugged. Fine by us, but the worker shook his head gently. She'll be okay. The girl frowned weakly. You promise? He nodded. Promise. Her small fingers finally loosened their grip on his sleeve. The stretcher rolled away. Marina hurried beside it, still clutching her daughter's hand. For a moment, the mall entrance filled with flashing red lights from the ambulance outside. Then, the doors closed, and the crowd slowly began to disperse. The atrium returned to its usual rhythm, escalators humming, music drifting from nearby stores, conversations rising again. But Holt remained standing in front of the maintenance worker. Combat medic, the supervisor said again. The man simply slung the tool pouch over his shoulder. Used to be, why leave something like that to fix escalators? The question hung there. The worker considered it. Then he gave the simplest answer possible. Life changes. He started walking toward the service corridor. But Holt followed a few steps behind. Hold on. The worker stopped but didn't turn around. What? Holt crossed his arms. You handled that situation better than most emergency responders I've seen, he hesitated. So forgive me if I'm curious why a former military medic is mopping floors in a shopping mall. The maintenance worker slowly turned back. For the first time since the chaos began, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not embarrassment, just quiet exhaustion. My son needed me home, he said. The explanation landed heavier than the earlier revelation. Holt didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded. The worker turned again and stepped into the dim hallway leading to the maintenance area. The bright mall lights faded behind him as the doors swung closed. Back in the atrium, the last of the crowd drifted away. But one person remained standing there longer than the others. Security Supervisor Darius Holt. He stared at the empty floor where the child had collapsed minutes earlier. And for the first time that evening, he realized how close things had come to going very wrong. The service corridor door clicked shut behind him, muting the noise of the mall almost instantly. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and warm machinery. It was the kind of quiet place most shoppers never noticed, the place where people like him actually worked. He walked a few steps down the hallway, letting the tension drain slowly from his shoulders. The adrenaline from the emergency still lingered in his muscles. Old instincts never really disappeared. They just waited. He reached the small utility sink near the maintenance closet and turned on the cold water. The faucet rattled for a second before a steady stream flowed out. He washed his hands carefully. The sound of running water filled the narrow space. For a moment, everything felt calm again, but the memory of the girl's breathing still echoed in his mind. Too fast, too shallow. He had seen that look too many times before. Different places, different crises, same fragile line between panic and survival. He shut the faucet off and grabbed a paper towel. Behind him, footsteps suddenly echoed down the corridor. Fast ones. He turned slightly just as the door to the atrium swung open again. Security Supervisor Holt stepped inside. "You got a minute?" The worker sighed quietly. "Thought we finished that conversation." Holt leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Maybe." He studied the man again, the same puzzled look returning. "You didn't even hesitate back there. That kid needed help. That's not what I mean." Holt shook his head slightly. Most people freeze when something like that happens. The worker tossed the used towel into a bin. "I didn't." "No," Holt agreed slowly. "You definitely didn't." The silence stretched between them. Through the wall, faint mall music drifted into the hallway. "Why didn't you mention the medic training earlier?" Holt asked. The man shrugged. "No one asked. You could have avoided a lot of suspicion, wouldn't have changed anything." Holt considered that. Maybe he was right. People had already decided who the maintenance worker was before hearing a single explanation. A radio crackled on Holt's shoulder. "Unit 3, update from paramedics." Holt pressed the button. "Go ahead. Child is stable. Oxygen levels normalizing." Relief slipped quietly into the corridor. Even the worker's shoulders eased slightly. "Good," Holt said into the radio. The channel clicked silent again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Holt asked another question. "You've been working here long?" "About a year, and before that?" The man leaned against the sink, clearly debating how much he wanted to explain. Different hospitals, field units, bases. Holt blinked. "You were active military that whole time?" 10 years. The supervisor let out a low whistle. 10 years saving lives and now you're unclogging drains. The worker gave a faint half-smile. "Life's weird like that, still doesn't explain the switch." He rubbed the back of his neck slowly. "My wife died 3 years ago." The words came quietly. No drama, no bitterness, just fact. Holt immediately regretted pushing the conversation. "I'm sorry." "Yeah." The man stared at the floor for a moment. She had a medical emergency at home. The silence thickened again. "I wasn't there," he added. Holt didn't know what to say. The worker looked up again. "So after that, priorities changed." He nodded toward the atrium beyond the wall. "My kid needed a father more than the army needed another medic." Holt understood that, even if he had never lived it. Another burst of radio chatter broke the quiet. "Supervisor Holt, ambulance just left the hospital." Holt frowned. "What do you mean?" "Mother requested a quick return to the mall." The supervisor blinked. That was fast. Apparently the child asked for someone. Holt glanced slowly toward the maintenance worker. "You?" The man frowned slightly. "Why?" Holt shrugged. Kid's request. Footsteps suddenly echoed again from the corridor entrance. This time hurried ones. The door swung open. A mall employee leaned inside, slightly out of breath. "They're back already. Who?" Holt asked. "The woman and her daughter." The worker straightened. "They released her that quickly?" Doctor cleared her for observation at home. The employee gestured toward the atrium. She's asking for the guy who helped her. Holt chuckled quietly. Well, looks like your shift isn't done yet. The maintenance worker sighed. Figures. They walked back toward the atrium together. The mall lights grew brighter as the door opened again, and the moment they stepped inside, the girl spotted him instantly. Hey! Her voice was still weak, but cheerful. She sat in a wheelchair now, wrapped in a hospital blanket. Her mother stood behind her, exhaustion written across her face, but relief was there too. When the girl saw him approaching, she smiled. A real one this time. You came back, she said. He crouched slightly so they were eye level again. Looks like you did too. The child giggled softly. Her mother stepped forward. Mister, he paused. Then finally answered. Ethan, Marina Velez nodded. Mr. Cole, the doctors said if you hadn't acted when you did, her airway could have closed completely. Her voice trembled again. I owe you my daughter's life. The maintenance worker shook his head gently. You don't owe me anything. But Security Supervisor Holt watched the moment carefully because the entire atmosphere of the mall had changed. Earlier that evening, people had looked at Ethan like a suspect. Now the same crowd watching nearby looked at him like something entirely different. And none of them realized yet that the night's biggest revelation was still coming. And you're the one who saved me. The girl's voice was soft but certain as she looked up from the wheelchair. Ethan gave a small shrug. You did most of the work. I just reminded you how to breathe. Leela giggled, the sound thin but much stronger than before. Marina Velez stood beside her daughter, one hand resting protectively on the wheelchair handle. The panic that had ruled her earlier was fading, replaced by a quiet exhaustion and a gratitude she still seemed unsure how to express. The bright lights of the mall atrium reflected off the polished floor again, but the atmosphere had shifted. A few people still lingered nearby, whispering and glancing toward the small group. Security Supervisor Darius Holt noticed it too. Earlier those looks had carried suspicion. Now they carried curiosity, and something close to admiration. Marina cleared her throat. Mr. Cole, the doctor explained everything on the ride back. Ethan leaned slightly against the railing near the escalator, hands resting casually on his tool pouch. Good news, I hope. She'll be fine, Marina said. The inhaler just didn't kick in fast enough during the panic. She paused before continuing. But the doctor also said something else. Ethan tilted his head slightly. He said whoever stabilized her knew exactly what they were doing. Holt crossed his arms quietly, waiting. Marina continued. He asked if you worked in emergency medicine. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Used to. The girl looked between them curiously. You were a doctor? He chuckled. No, kid. Just the guy doctors yell for when things get messy. Leela grinned at that. Marina studied him again. You said combat medicine earlier. Yeah. You don't just walk away from something like that. Ethan shrugged lightly. Sometimes life makes a decision for you. Before she could respond, Holt stepped forward. He mentioned his wife earlier, the supervisor said gently. Marina's expression softened immediately. Oh. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Look, your daughter's breathing fine now. That's what matters. Leela suddenly pointed at the tool pouch hanging from his belt. Is that where your medical stuff is? He glanced down at it. Nope, just wrenches and screwdrivers, but you helped me with it. Improvisation. She considered that word seriously. Then nodded like it made perfect sense. Marina watched the exchange carefully. You stayed calm through all of that, she said. I've seen worse. The statement wasn't meant to impress anyone. It simply slipped out like a quiet fact. But Holt noticed something in the man's tone. Memories. The kind people carried long after the war ended. The security supervisor shifted slightly. You didn't even raise your voice when we questioned you earlier. Ethan looked at him calmly. Didn't seem helpful. Holt chuckled. Fair point. Marina exhaled slowly. I owe you more than just a thank you. Ethan shook his head again. No, you don't. You saved my daughter's life. He glanced at Lila, who was now studying the mall ceiling lights like they were the most interesting thing she had ever seen. I helped, he corrected gently. The little girl suddenly turned back toward him. Are you coming with us next time? He blinked. Next time what? When we go to the mall again? Marina laughed softly despite the emotional exhaustion. Lila. But Ethan smiled. I'll probably be here. That's where I work. The girl nodded approvingly. Good. Nearby, a few shoppers continued whispering. Phones had captured parts of the earlier scene. Security Supervisor Holt noticed the attention spreading. Looks like you've got an audience now, he muttered. Ethan glanced around and sighed quietly. Fantastic. Marina noticed the same thing. People are talking about what happened. That's how crowds work. But they're talking about you. He shrugged again. Give it a day. They'll forget. Holt wasn't so sure. A maintenance worker performing emergency medical intervention in the middle of a crowded mall wasn't something people forgot easily. Lila yawned suddenly, her small body sagging in the wheelchair. Marina immediately leaned down. You're tired. The girl nodded slowly. Ethan crouched again so she didn't have to tilt her head. You did great today, did I? Absolutely. She smiled again, eyes growing heavy. Thanks for helping me breathe. Something in Ethan's chest tightened for a moment. He had heard similar words before. In very different places. Anytime, kid. Marina gently turned the wheelchair toward the exit. We should get her home before she moved away. She paused again in front of him. Mr. Cole, I hope we see you again. You probably will. And next time, she added quietly, I'll recognize the hero sooner. Ethan shook his head with a faint smile. I'm just the maintenance guy. But as Marina pushed the wheelchair toward the glass doors and the cool night outside, Security Supervisor Holt watched Ethan carefully. Because he had spent years reading people in tense situations, and the man standing beside the escalator was definitely not just a maintenance guy. By the way, if stories like this remind you that real heroes often go unnoticed, make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one. Holt folded his arms and glanced at the quiet worker beside him. You ever notice something, Cole? What's that? The people who say they're just doing their job. He nodded toward the exit where the child had just been taken home. Usually did something far bigger. Ethan didn't answer Holt right away. He simply watched the glass doors slide shut behind Marina and Lila as they disappeared into the cool evening outside. The flashing ambulance lights were gone now, replaced by the steady glow of the mall's parking lot lamps. The crisis had passed. Or at least that's what everyone believed. He adjusted the strap of his tool pouch and turned toward the service corridor again. Shift's not over, he said calmly. Holt followed beside him. You just saved a kid in front of half the mall. Pretty sure your shift gets a pass tonight. Ethan pushed open the maintenance door. Escalator 3 still makes that grinding noise every time it starts. That escalator can wait. Machines don't care about dramatic moments. The supervisor laughed quietly. You're a strange guy, Cole. Inside the corridor, the quiet returned again. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Ethan pulled a small flashlight from his pouch. He crouched beside an access panel near the escalator base. Metal screws loosened with a quick twist of his wrench. Routine. Predictable. Safe. Holt leaned against the wall, watching him work. You miss it? Ethan glanced up briefly. Miss what? The army. The wrench clicked softly against metal. Sometimes, yeah? Mostly the people. Holt nodded. That part I get. The escalator motor hummed above them as Ethan inspected the mechanism. A small alignment issue, nothing dramatic. He adjusted the gear housing carefully. But just as he tightened the final bolt, Holt's radio crackled again. Supervisor Holt. He pressed the button. Go ahead. Call from the hospital. Holt frowned. I thought the girl was already released. She was. The voice on the radio sounded slightly confused. But the doctor asked if the man who stabilized her earlier is still there. Holt looked down at Ethan. Yeah, he's here. Doctor said to tell him something important. Ethan slowly set his wrench down. What kind of important? Holt pressed the radio closer. Go ahead. The reply came through clearly. The child didn't just have an asthma attack. Ethan's posture shifted instantly. Years of training sharpened his attention again. What do you mean? Holt asked. The ER doctor reviewed the airway reaction. There were signs of something else triggering the episode. Ethan stood slowly now. An allergic reaction? He asked. The radio voice paused. That's exactly what they're trying to confirm. A cold thread of concern slid through Ethan's chest. Did she eat anything before the attack? He asked Holt quietly. Holt frowned. I don't know. The radio crackled again. Doctor says if the man who helped her noticed anything unusual before she collapsed, it could help identify the trigger. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, replaying the moment in his mind. The fountain area, the girl crying, the wheezing. Then something else surfaced in his memory. A smell. Sweet. Strong. Pretzels, he muttered. Holt blinked. What? There was a pretzel stand near where I found her. The radio picked it up. Repeat that? Cinnamon pretzels, Ethan said. Heavy sugar coating. Another pause. Then the voice came back sharper. That could be it, Holt straightened. What are you saying? The voice on the radio answered carefully. Severe cinnamon allergies can cause airway reactions that look exactly like asthma attacks. Ethan felt the realization settle heavily. If she inhaled cinnamon powder in the air, the radio voice finished the thought. It could trigger the entire event. Holt rubbed his forehead. You're telling me the smell from a food stand nearly killed that kid? In rare cases, yes. Ethan turned slowly toward the atrium entrance. Shoppers still moved casually past the pretzel kiosk near the fountain. Steam drifted up from trays of freshly baked dough. The smell of cinnamon hung thick in the air. He studied it carefully now. And something about it didn't sit right. Hold on, he said quietly. Holt noticed the change immediately. What? Ethan stepped toward the atrium. That smell is stronger than it should be. Holt followed him. What does that mean? Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. In enclosed spaces like this, he inhaled carefully again. That much airborne cinnamon powder spreads fast. They reached the railing overlooking the main floor. Shoppers walked directly past the pretzel stand. Kids laughed. Parents chatted. No one seemed to notice anything unusual. But Ethan's instincts had already locked on to the problem. What are you thinking? Holt asked. Ethan watched a worker behind the stand shake another tray of cinnamon sugar across fresh pretzels. A thick cloud of powder lifted into the air. Floating. Drifting. Exactly the kind of airborne exposure that could trigger the reaction Leela had experienced, and if she had collapsed from a brief exposure, Ethan's stomach tightened. How many other kids with allergies walk through here every hour? He said quietly. Holt froze. The question landed like a warning siren, because suddenly the incident with the little girl didn't look like a random accident anymore. It looked like a problem waiting to happen again. Holt leaned forward over the railing, eyes narrowing at the pretzel kiosk below. The employee behind the counter shook another tray of cinnamon sugar over fresh dough, sending a soft cloud drifting through the air. Most shoppers didn't even notice. But now that Ethan had pointed it out, Holt couldn't unsee it. That much powder just floating around, Holt muttered. Ethan nodded once. Air currents move it everywhere. They both watched a young child run past the stand laughing, cutting straight through the drifting cinnamon haze. Nothing happened. But that didn't mean it couldn't. Holt rubbed his jaw slowly. You think that's what triggered the girl's attack? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He studied the space carefully instead. The mall's ventilation fans pushed air gently across the atrium, circulating smells from nearby restaurants. Cinnamon, coffee, fried food, normally pleasant scents. But for someone with a severe allergy, that same circulation could become dangerous. I can't prove it, Ethan said finally. But the timing lines up. Holt tapped his radio. Mall control, come in. Static answered. Then a voice. Control here. Do we have any allergy complaints tied to the pretzel stand recently? A pause followed. Not that I know of. Ethan kept watching the drifting powder. The kiosk worker shook another tray. More cinnamon dust lifted. He exhaled slowly. That stand's using way too much. Holt glanced sideways. You can tell that just by looking? Smell it, Holt did. The scent was strong enough to sting his nose. Yeah, all right. That's pretty intense. Below them a woman walking past suddenly sneezed. Then another. Nothing serious. But enough to make Holt uneasy. If a kid with a bad allergy walked through that cloud, Ethan finished the thought quietly. They could collapse the same way. Holt straightened. Great. The supervisor pressed his radio again. Control, I want maintenance ventilation readings near the fountain area. The response came quickly. Checking. Ethan stepped toward the escalator and started walking down. Holt followed. You planning something? Just looking. They reached the main floor and moved toward the kiosk. The scent of cinnamon grew stronger with each step. Ethan's nose wrinkled slightly. Definitely excessive. The employee behind the counter smiled politely when they approached. Can I help you guys? Holt flashed his security badge. Quick question. The employee nodded. Sure. Ethan looked at the tray of cinnamon mixture. How often do you apply that coating? Every batch. How much? The worker shrugged. Manager says keep it generous. Holt gestured toward the drifting powder. Ever had anyone complain about allergies? The employee hesitated. A few parents mentioned it being strong. Ethan exchanged a glance with Holt. How many? Maybe 3 or 4 this week. That answer made Holt's jaw tighten. Did management log those complaints? The worker shook his head slowly. I don't think so. Holt pressed his radio again. Control, get the mall operations manager down here now. Copy. Ethan looked up at the air vents above the kiosk. A thin stream of cinnamon particles floated toward the center.